Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with the intro. So Mr. David Lockhart here is a little bit of everything. He's a teacher, a coach, a presenter, a maker, and a whole host of other things that have all one thing in mind, or have one goal in mind, I should say, and that's to make the classroom different. He did it in his own classroom by bringing a historical newsroom concept to high school social studies. He did it as a coach and maker with the KSU I Teach team. And now he does it with now he does it with coding as a member of the team of Tynker. So he's a member of Tynker as well. His mission is to bring change to classrooms. So without further ado, Mr. David Lockhart.
All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Actually, let's do this first so I know which screen to actually. This will be interesting. Let's see. So it's going to go to that screen. So let's share that screen. Hopefully this will work out the way that we want it to.
That's good.
All right. So that's I've got so many screens here. I'm trying to figure out which screen to actually share it to. So this is driving the move to text coding in the middle school. And like he said, my name's David Lockhart. Like Terry said, I'm the educator support coach at Tynker. Basically, that means that I'm the person that helps and supports teachers on our team. I do a lot of coaching and professional development and all of those types of things. I'm a former teacher and tech coach myself, as he kind of said in the bio, and I am actually from the Atlanta area. So I was a teacher at Wheeler High School in Cobb County for many years, and then I moved on to North Atlanta in APS. And then I transitioned and I worked with the KSU I Teach team for a couple of years. And if you've had the luck of seeing the Maker Bus come out, I help. That's kind of one of the things that I'm the most proud of, is helping build that Maker Bus. And so I'm a big guy in a bow tie on Twitter. Usually if you see me at a conference, like if you see me at GAETC or somewhere like that, I'll have my bow tie on. But when we're all quarantined at home, no bow tie today. And kind of what we're going to do today, and Terry will, if you have questions as we go, definitely let Terry post them in the chat as I do the slide deck, and I'll flip back and forth from the slide deck into the actual platform. I can't really see the question, so definitely let Terry know and he can ask as we go. But basically what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what is Tynker, and then we're going to talk about that course progression, because when you look at coding as a whole from a course progression standpoint, we're in this middle school session, and middle school is kind of a funky time. It's a funky time in the kids' lives. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I know that for a fact. And it's also kind of a funky time as kind of transitioning coding, because when you look at it from kind of that transitional stage, from kind of doing block that doesn't really need syntax up into actually writing real text. And so we'll look at kind of how Tynker sees that. And then we're going to do a lot of building. We're going to do a lot of building and creating and showing you kind of what the Tynker environment looks like, giving you an opportunity to go in there and kind of play and create and kind of go from there. And then towards the end, we'll talk about how you can get more from us and stay connected to us and all that kind of stuff. But really, when you look at what is Tynker as a whole, and really, I like to say it's kind of the easiest way to teach coding and computer science in schools. And really, from that standpoint, there's kind of two main principles that make this happen. Number one is that we have great creative coding tools. And I think from my standpoint, I'm coming from a classroom where I got into coding. I'm not a natural coder. I was a high school social studies teacher, actually. But creation is what drew me to this. And I think that's what we'll talk about a lot today, is creation. And how do we get that past the kind of base stuff that we do in a classroom, and how do we get it into like letting core classrooms create with code? And that's kind of where I want to take this a lot when we talk today. And so when you look at it, I think the key here with middle school is that it's both block and text coding, because when you get kids in middle school, you're going to see them at all different levels. You're going to see them at a kind of a block coding level where they're not really ready to get into there to worry about syntax and worry about periods and colons and all that kind of stuff. And then you're going to see them, you're going to have those kids that are ready to write in Python. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as we go too. And it's a comprehensive curriculum. It's a curriculum that you can build kids from that kind of that base kind of Tynker block up into Python and into JavaScript and even into some AP courses as well. And then I think, again, the key here and the key that I want to drive home in this is how do you actually put coding and computer science in a core class? Because when you look at it, kind of the way we're doing coding and computer science today is it really drives a lot to letting kids go in and like there's a specialized class, which are great. Specialized classes are awesome, but we don't hit every kid with it. Or it's kind of an ad hoc time where there's a time of year that kids go and code, but then kids can lose interest as they go. And so there's STEM lessons here. There's lessons that are core content based. And then the other part is we kind of go, I'll show you kind of how to build in the workshop where you could build lessons in social studies and science and all of those other parts. And then I think the other key here is a lot of you, if you're coming to a computer science conference, coding conference, you're probably on the CS train. But I think as we go, we want to make this as easy as possible on teachers. And so this entire platform, if you've never played with it, is set up just like a learning management system. So like Schoology or Classroom or Canvas or any of those. And so it makes it really, really easy to go and add those other teachers. And then I think it's data. Can we see where kids' progresses are and really help them? And especially as we go back, I know my kids are in Cobb County. We don't know what the fall is going to look like. So especially as we go back, can you see that data and help kids, especially remotely? And I think that goes back to that, let's make this about creation and making. And I think when you look at coding as a whole, that's what it should be. It's empowering kids to be makers and create, because that's the way that kids really learn the best. I know for me as a student, that was one of the things that I wished I could have done more in school. I was not the best student in school. I needed that hands-on, that tangible where I could go create. And then I also saw with my own students that that's the place where they really learn. They really learn when you can go and have them create and build something. And then it's just something that's natural. And I think when you look at kind of a place to go and create, this is what I like about Tynker, is that you can see it in all different types of aspects. And you can do that creation and building. You can do it from a block coding standpoint, which is really important at a middle school level, because you have kids that putting them in Python is really going to confuse them. But then you can transition into that Python level and that JavaScript level where kids are going and they're actually building in those courses. I think augmented reality and Minecraft, there are great ways that kids can go in and start coding just in fun ways, where they can go in those things that interest them. They can build Pokemon Go style games. They can build in Minecraft. But then I think there's also places for that physical computing and that device. And I know there's some other sessions about this at the conference. That device in that bottom left corner is actually one of my favorite maker devices that I've seen. When you look at Microbit, I think what I really learned in building a maker bus and doing maker camps and all of that is that the key to coding and making, and especially when you look at hardware, because there's a lot of hardware out there, is can you get a device that's actually has a super high ceiling that lets kids do all different kinds of stuff on it and build all kinds of different ways. And that Microbit is only $15. And you can do that. It's got, you flip it over, there's LEDs on the side, there's buttons there, and you can plug in lights and motors and sensors. So you can start really making that coding come to life. And I think that's, as a whole, for what we do in schools, I think that's a really key point. The other thing with Microbit is I love a Raspberry Pi. In fact, I have a Raspberry Pi sitting on my desk right now because I have a RetroPie set up, if you know what that is. But when you look at things like that, a lot of times it's not super accessible for kids. It's really the kind of the entry level is not as easy. And with Microbit, the entry level is super, super easy as well. And then you look at robotics and drones, that we do connect with a lot of robotics and drones that you can put out there and kind of see. And really, this is something that's worldwide. You can see kind of, there's a community out there. There's a community of schools in Georgia that I work with. And you'll see that as we kind of go through some of the other sessions. You guys were lucky enough to get the one I'm doing solo, but Wednesday, I'm doing 2 elementary school sessions with Georgia teachers. But really getting into that grade progression. And I think when you look at this, even if you're like even if you don't want to kind of look at it from a Tynker perspective, I think this is definitely a way to kind of look at kind of how we teach coding in schools. How do we teach coding to students? And really, when we look at that grade progression, I think the big keys here is you go from a pre-reader, And I think with pre-readers, it's really, really important to go and start kids as young as they can, because coding it has some similarities to a language. It's not necessarily one-to-one kind of comparison to a world language. But there's some similarities there in that fact that if you start earlier, the easier it is to learn. And so having a pre-reader kind of voice-enabled, tappable kind of screen that kids can start learning some of those things like loops and conditionals is always a really great way to start those kids building. Then you kind of, when you get to elementary and kind of early middle school, you can transition those kids to the drag and drop blocks. The key is the reading skills. Those blocks have words on them. They have text on them. So it's that kind of reading skills that you can transition them to. And then when you go into middle school, I think middle school is this transitional phase where you go from kind of that block coding aspects of elementary school, and you still may have some of that in middle school, but you want to start transitioning them into actually being able to write in real text. And one of the ways that we kind of see it, and I'll show you this in a second, is that we see it as, can you go and convert blocks over to a text code? Can you go and see blocks and put blocks together in JavaScript and Python without having to necessarily worry exactly about syntax? And I'll show you kind of how to do that, because it's a really good starting activity, even if you don't use Tynker. And then when you get to high school, obviously the goal is to have kids coding in real languages. Obviously, sometimes that's not the case, just depending on the kids. And I think it's all about really kind of personalizing that learning for students. And so really where we see this, and we're going to kind of walk through this in just a second to give you some time to play around in here and poke around, and we'll walk through some of the lessons together, is we see it that you start that kind of transition in middle school with blocks. And so it's learning programming concepts, things like loops and variables and events and functions and that conditional logic. And again, you can build in those STEM projects where kids are actually going into creating for core classrooms. And so from my standpoint too, coming from a social studies background, I always saw it that where this kind of, I wrap my head around this, is that I used to have kids do video projects. But occasionally I would have that student who you could give them $100 bill, they're not going to put themselves on video. And so if I can go and I can give them a tool that lets them animate a story and tell their story, and that also gives them a future skill like coding, that's a great way to kind of combine those two together. And then the other part is that once you kind of get them through that, what we want to do is we actually want to advance them. We want to go and advance them where they're doing JavaScript game design and Python, turtle graphics, and web development. And so what I want to do now is I actually want to give you an opportunity to try it. And this is a good time, if there's questions, to definitely do that. So what we'll do, and I'll walk you through this process in just a sec, is that what I want you to do is I want you to go, if you have an account already, great. If you don't, go to tynker.com and just log in. Because what we want to do is I want to show you there's one course that's free. That's a great kind of way to poke around with middle school curriculum and see kind of where you want to go with it. And we'll do some of those environments together. So go to tynker.com and I'll kind of flip back over to my web. Let me see if I can flip back to the right screen. Give me 1 second. Let me flip back to a different screen. That's not what I want. I want to come here and you'll see myself. All right, so I think we should be good. Yeah, we should be good. So what I want you to do is I want you to go and let me log out here. We're going to kind of walk through some of this together, and then I'll give you some time to really kind of poke around and play in here. And so you're going to go to tynker.com and you're going to sign in. Now, here's the key with signing in, is that, and this is what's really easy for the kids as well, is that the key with signing in is that as a teacher, you can sign in with Google and Microsoft. So most of you probably have Google accounts or Microsoft accounts. That's a really quick way to get in. So you want to go in as a teacher and sign in that way. And then the key also with this is that from a remote learning standpoint, the kids can sign in with their existing Google and Microsoft accounts as well. And then you just give them a class code and they're in. But I'm going to click Google and I'm going to sign in that way. So I'll give you a chance to sign in, and then we'll talk about we'll poke through some of the projects together if you want to follow along with me. So I'm going to sign in. And where we're going to go once we sign in, and I'll stop for a second here, is we're going to go to courses. And your course may look a little different. There may be a free tab, but we're going to find a specific course. So you go to sign in and go to courses. Let me see if I can hopping up over here. I'll give you a second there. If there's questions, this is a great time for them. Let me see if I can pull hopping up so I can also see the chat a little bit. Let's go here. RetroPie. All right. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go down to Programming 300, which is a free course. And the reason I want to show you this and kind of use this as a base to what we're doing. So sign in as a teacher, Shannon. I see that question. What I wanted you to do, and you can just sign in, or even if you're not a teacher, just sign in as a teacher for right now. And so we're going to go to Programming 300, and we're going to hit preview on Programming 300. And this is really the reason that we're going to start here is because this is a great way to kind of go and see the Tynker Middle School, kind of the stuff that you could do with middle school. And I'll kind of show you a little bit as we go. And so when you look at Programming 300, when you click preview on that course, so we're on the course page. I got too many screens for this. We're on the course page. And you may have a free tab. That's fine. We're just going to click Programming 300. And when you click Programming 300, yep, that's great. So if you see the classroom setup page, you can just click the horizontal lines at the top left of the screen to bring up the dashboard and then select courses. Yeah, it's going to kick you into the class. We're not going to worry about classroom setup here because we want to talk more about content. But the classroom setup is super easy to do. And so that's kind of a whole different thing. But I want to show you kind of speak to it more from because even if it's not about Tynker, this is kind of the way we see content at this level. And I think that's a really key piece. But if you click preview on the course, you click preview on Programming 300, and then you're going to click that lessons tab. So preview and lessons. And the reason I want to show you this is because this kind of hits every kind of environment that you'll see from a middle school level. And so when you look at it from a middle school level, you'll see the puzzle environment, and there's some real key pieces to the puzzle environment that can the block puzzle that can actually lead into Python activities, which I think is a really fun way to do it. We'll talk about the workshop environment, which is kind of where you can go and create with block, and there's so much you can do there. But then we'll also show you kind of the Python environment too, and JavaScript. They're very similar. And so with the puzzle environment, so if you get to that Programming 300, that first Intro to Tynker, and you click preview on Intro to Tynker, you can there's lesson plans here. Everything in Tynker has a lesson plan. There's standards, all of that stuff. Yep. And then you can also, and I can zoom in here a little bit to show a little forward. And then what you can also do is you can click on these puzzle icons. You get to click on any of the activities we're asking the kids to. And so we're just going to click on that puzzle icon. And this is kind of the puzzle. The idea behind these, and we'll just skip through the intro for a second. The idea behind a puzzle in this kind of environment is that we want to have kids go and learn things like coding concepts, learn things like loops and conditionals and that kind of thing. Let me turn off volume so it's not right in my ears. And we want kids to go and practice with those before they actually go and create. And so when you look at kind of that coding concept, this is a really simple puzzle that you go and you kind of have this dragon move forward. But the idea here too, and I think from a middle school standpoint, one of the activities that you can do, even if you look at this from just straight up block, is kind of that transitional, and we'll kind of practice this in a minute, is down here in the bottom left corner of this, there's Python, Swift, and JavaScript logos. And so remember, one of the ways we want to transition kids from that kind of elementary school block coding creation into the kind of high school level text coding creation is we want to have kids go and code with blocks but have them actually do it in a real language. And so if you look down here, there's a Python logo, there's a Swift logo, there's a JavaScript logo. And if you click the Python logo, it'll actually convert those blocks into Python. So think about what you can do with this, is that you can actually, there's plenty of free puzzles that'll do this, is you can actually take these out. And if you're trying to teach that conversion to Python, you can actually go and have kids write the Python out, go and do a block that they're used to, like a puzzle like this is super simple, and then they can actually check their work in Python. And we'll practice some of that in a second. But the idea here is that you look at it is that kids can see the Python, but they're not having to worry about these parentheses just yet. They're not having to worry about that colon just yet being in the right place. And I know if you guys are in that, probably here is you've taught some text languages. And when you look at it from a text language standpoint, that's the hardest part, is can you get that syntax right? And so when you look at it, if you press play, he's going to do the thing. But we'll look at it from the Swift standpoint and from the JavaScript standpoint. But if you press play, he'll do the thing. And that'll actually lead kids into things like loops and conditionals as well. And then the other environment from a block standpoint is, so I'm going to come out of that puzzle and I'm going to go back to kind of the programming 300 regular page. And so if you click that puzzle, so let me see, so make sure if you guys are trying to follow along, I'll go back into that puzzle. I did that a little quick, sorry. If you click the little arrow in the top left, it'll take you right back to the main page. And so it'll take you right back to the main page. You go there, I go back to programming 300, and I'm going to come back to that lessons page. So it takes you right back to the main page of that lesson. You're going to go back one more and with that arrow in the top left, and then you're going to go back to that main page of the lesson. So that's kind of a puzzle block environment. This intro to game design, that's actually, if we hit preview here, again, it'll give you all kinds of like lesson plans and vocabulary and all that kind of stuff. But then the idea is, can we take blocks and can we take them and let kids create with them? And so if I click into here, what you're going to get is you're actually going to get a project. And so the idea is that kids go and they can build their project here. They can build their own content here. And so kind of some things to kind of notice is that when you're starting to teach kids, especially if you're kind of like, you've got kids in different places, it's really hard. Kids are kind of at different coding levels in middle school. It's always nice having tutorials that you can use, that you can skip next. And they'll actually ask the kids to bring in those. This is a physics project, so that's why it's bringing in, these blocks are physics blocks. And you can kind of move through that tutorial. And so the kids can start to build that creative project, because what's behind this tutorial is that if you click this button in the top right, this is that block coding library where the kids can start getting really, really creative. And they can start making characters like the little monkey do all kinds of different things. And really the whole goal with this is, can you go and have kids build their own stuff? And can they build their own projects? And so and I know most of you have probably seen kind of block coding as a whole, the basic idea is that you add actors over here, you have an actors list, and then you're going to use these blocks to go and make those actors do something and make them go and have some sort of function. Now with that, some kind of key pieces here is that you can convert all of this to JavaScript. So from a middle school standpoint, I can actually take the JS right here and I can convert it to JavaScript so kids can go in there and they can actually see that JavaScript. Unfortunately, this is not editable, but you can have kids see kind of how this project looks in JavaScript. But what you can also do as a teacher is I can actually, and I'm going to come back to, let's go back, let's get out of the JavaScript. What I can also do as a teacher, and I'm going to downsize this just a little bit so I can see it, is I can actually build my own stuff in here, build my own creative outputs in here. And so I can come down here to edit tutorial. This is only in the teacher side. So it's the little 3 dots up here in edit tutorial, and you can build your own stuff. You can build your own output. You can build your own tutorials. You can build any of those things where the kids can then go, you could tweak this one to do it, and the kids can build those projects. So from a social studies perspective, I can actually build my own projects out. But the base idea, again, is that kids come over here and they go and they code each of these actors to do something. So for instance, when this right cannon actor, it's got a physics block, it's going to react to physics. And then when after clicked, it's going to repeat where mouse down. It's going to point towards the mouse pointer, and then it's going to shoot. When you look at it from a Python perspective, so that's kind of how you kind of move kids from block. When you look at it from kind of a Python perspective, the idea is that kids can go and they start in kind of a puzzle environment, and then they kind of move into actually doing projects. So there's lots of Tynker courses and lots of Tynker coursework. But when you look at it from a Python project, like base Python perspective, the idea here is that I have a little puzzle with this guy, and I'm actually writing real Python. And so when you write Python here, this is actually pretty easy, is that I can go in here and write Python. I can go in here and write... yes, I am sharing my screen. It's over on the side. Am I not sharing my screen, Terry? It looks like I am.
See it?
Oh, okay. And so when you look at it from the Python perspective, so I don't want to butcher the name. If you look at the right-hand side, there's a couple of different views. There's a video view of me, but there's also a video view of the screen. And then, so when you look at the kind of Python side of this, is that I can go and I can click Python here, and I can go and do that. And now this, I think I didn't do this all the way right. I didn't write the code right. I noticed that as I went. But so that's kind of how you can practice and kind of transition kids. So when I look at it from a transitional stage, it's can you go and have kids do in block? Can they then convert those blocks into a text language like Python or JavaScript or even HTML? And then can they move in to actually write that code? And you have this puzzle environment that lets you do that. So I think what I want to do now is I want to stop talking for a few minutes. Yeah, that's exactly. So I want to stop talking for a few minutes, go in there and poke around and play with Programming 300, see kind of that transitional phase. And then what we'll do is we'll actually talk about how to kind of teach it from a block perspective, is to teach kind of that move into Python. So I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes. If you have questions, I can see the chat at this point as well too. So definitely go and post those in the chat, and then we'll kind of go from there. So kind of poke around, play around in Programming 300, and then I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll move and to kind of show you kind of like how do I write use blocks that then convert over to Python. Hey, I'm glad you can see me now. All right, so I'll give you guys about 3 minutes to poke around in there. Please definitely throw questions at us if you have them as you kind of poke around and kind of try some of those activities. Definitely want to answer those as we go. Again, it's that all about that transition. Can we transition kids into that text? So I can touch on how to assign courses real quick, Sunny. We can definitely do that. Let's give it about 3 minutes and then I'll touch on that real quick. So as you're wanting to poke around some more, definitely do that. But I want to touch on a couple questions and kind of touch on a couple things before we kind of move to the next piece here. Is number one, again, it's to me, like I said, is that this is all about creation for me. Is can you go and use code as kind of that creative output and get this kind of, because I think when you look at, and I'm sure you guys have seen this throughout the conference, is that coding, if it's kind of, there's so much in the world that needs it and so much in the world that needs it as far as the skills that come with it. Obviously, there's tons of jobs that come with it as well. So can we go and take it where it's more than just that elective, where you can actually use it as a creative output in core classes? And just real brief, one of the things that I wanted to challenge myself when I came to Tynker as this kind of educator support person was, can I go and create an activity that I used to do in my high school social studies class? And again, this kind of the thought process here is that I had kids do these video projects and these video commercials for the Industrial Revolution, where the idea is that they're that person, they pitch that project, they pitch that product. And I had them do them on video. But occasionally I remember this class very distinctly where I had this, it was an IB history class at North Atlanta actually, where I had this young lady who I could literally pay her $1 million and she's not going to put herself on video. But she's still willing to tell her story. So can I combine that with a future-ready skill like coding to really bring that out in the class? And so real quickly, this was like it's a kind of basic mock-up of that project that I did in Tynker. And really all it is I'm uploading the Thomas Edison lab and the actor into it. And then I'm programming it to just say a couple of things and kind of assign that light bulb as well. And so really I think the whole key here, and the code is actually it should be different where the light bulb is off first and then goes on, yes. And it should be a little bit more if it was students. But the whole key here is that it's the possibility of creation. Can kids go in there and they can actually create? Now from Sunny's question, Sunny asked real quick about like assigning courses. And that's actually a fairly easy process. I don't want to go too deep into it. Because really when you get into kind of building classes, the idea is that we want it to be open to lots of different platforms. And so really, if you don't have classes yet, you're going to see this page. But if you have class, you're going to not see this page. It'll take you right into that class workflow. But if you want to build classes, you hit add class. And it's going to take you into that workflow where you build a class. And the idea is that I can build a class with Google Classroom. I can go and have auto-generated logins. Kids can join with a class code. There's lots of ways that this is open to students. And then what happens is once I build that class, then I can assign those lessons. And so all of these class cards are classes that I built. And think of it definitely in a kind of way that's very similar to Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom or any of those pieces. But like when I click in a class, the key is that you kind of see everything in here. So I have lots of data that I can see where my kids are. I can actually see projects that the kids are doing, and I can actually click into those projects. So it's not sharing like links back and forth, although you can do that too, but you can see all that data. And then from an assigning lesson standpoint, you just click you can do it a couple of different ways. But if you click this lessons tab, it's going to take you to that assign a course page. And then if you look over all of these buttons, when you scroll over and we hit preview, there's also that assign a course. If I hit preview on the lesson as well, and I hit lessons here, there's also that assign on the individual lesson. So that's kind of how you assign lessons. Really, you can build classes, but building classes is very dependent kind of on your setup, whether you're Google Classroom, we support Clever. There's all kinds of different ways to do that. And if you're really interested and kind of didn't get enough building classes, I have some contact info at the end where I can definitely help you do that as well. Yeah, no problem. That's definitely a great question. So what I want to kind of talk about now is I actually want to talk about that transitional phase. And so that is not what I want to do. Let me share the right screen. Give me 1 second. I have too many screens up. So give me 1 second because I want to go back to the deck. So Terry, you can see the screen, the presentation?
Presentation's
Cool.
up.
All right, so one of the things that I want to kind of talk about is can you take blocks and can you transition those to Python? And I think this is a key point that we kind of miss is can you make that connection? So a lot of times you'll see I've had programmers in sessions that are longtime programmers that learn programming a different way and they kind of question that block coding format. To me, when I look at block, I say, block coding, it teaches kids all of the coding concepts without having to really worry about the syntax yet. And I don't know about you, but if you have kids, if you have a third grader, I've seen my kids when they're third graders write, they can't put periods on the ends of sentences. How are they going to go and do Python syntax and learn it that way? So that's kind of the way that I see this. And so when you look at kind of the block coding aspect is the first thing is, can you take these blocks right here and can you convert them to Python? Can you actually write out the Python here and can you convert that way? And some of you may have not had much Python and that's okay because we're going to kind of show you the answer here and show you kind of how this is structured. But can you go and actually convert this to Python? And really, if you've had Python before, if you know Python as well, you could also challenge yourself here and say, can I actually add the loop in here that is obvious? So when you look at this, converting this to Python, the idea here is it's fairly simple Python, is that you have a function to start. So when you look at onStart, I think that's the one thing that's a little bit different, is when you look at Python as a whole, functions in Python are a little bit more complex than kind of the base that you'll see taught in Python. But when you look at basically an event block in Tynker Blocks or Scratch Blocks or whatever, it's basically a function in Python. And the reason that I like Python and the reason I think Python is definitely the language to teach here is when you go and look at this, that function is def on start. You have to get all of that syntax right. So the place where it says DEF and then there's a space, that space has to be there. When you look at ON and then that underscore has to be there. Then the colon and the parentheses have to be there. But when you look at other text languages, especially when you talk the kind of punctuation of it, even if you kind of look at JavaScript, The punctuation of it is a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more there. And so Python is always, we kind of teach Python as the kind of place to start. But when you look at that function, and you can kind of write this down because I'm going to ask you to try another one here in just a sec, is you have that function that says def on start, that's the function. And then really those commands are really simple to write in Python. It's walk and then parentheses, walk, then parentheses, the parentheses. And so it's a fairly simple language. It's a fairly readable language to learn. But again, this is kind of that transitional phase. Can you go and do something that the kids know, like block coding, and can you transition it into something the kids don't know, like text? Can they go and use that as a base way? So the way that I see this being taught, if I was in a classroom, is kind of like what we're doing, where you start and you walk kids through it a little bit and you say, here's the Python. And then you can kind of go and you can see kids move to the next one. So if you have a piece of paper, or even if you have a Python compiler, I'll give you a second. Can you actually write this one out in Python? I'll give you a second to write this one in Python.
For anyone to share their screen to show what they have, or
are they, well, they may have just be writing it on paper. If they want to share their screen, we can definitely do that if there's volunteers.
okay.
I'm for sure good with that. I'm not used to the back and forth. Well, because usually when I'm doing like webinars, it's like there's not much back and forth.
Right.
So that's why I'm like, all right. So I guess we'll kind of show you what it actually looks like. So when you look at kind of that Python, the way you look at the Python here, again, it's that function. So you have that def on start function, that colon and the parentheses, that function's there. And then think about it. It's the kind of those same things, but it's that kind of, you have to have that indentation too with def, because it's those functions underneath it. So it's that walk block with the parentheses, that walk block with the parentheses, jump and walk. So you're kind of moving kids and transitioning them to that. So what I want to do now is I actually want to give you some time to practice this and show you a place that's really easy to do it. And so when I go into, so Tynker has a great kind of hour of code library. And let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Let me go here. The only thing I'm not doing well is transitioning screens, but that's all right. Here we go. All right, so let's look at this. So when you go into the Tynker library, you can find the Tynker hour of code, and this is where you don't even have to log in. So I'm going to go to tynker.com/hour of code. And this is a great way to kind of think about that transitional phase where you can transition. So you can transition kind of kids to that Python in it. And so when you look at it, there's Candy Quest right here. So we've done Candy Quest. So really you could have kids not even have to log into Tynker, just go to Tynker hour of code and they can click on Candy Quest and they can click play now. And so the idea is that they go and they can actually start transitioning their own, doing it themselves. So this, you have this little guy right here. So we're going to repeat. So I believe he's walk. I think he's got a walk block first. No, I think it's walk jump too. I'll just do it. I won't waste your time trying to do that. But you could have kids do the block coding here, and then you can actually have them transition to that Python. And so the idea is that, and I want you to practice this, is go to that tynker.com/hour of code, click on Candy Quest, go and do the block. But before you transition it, write out the Python. See if you can actually write that Python out where you can do it. And you can see that this one actually has a loop in it as well. So I'll leave that loop on the screen just in case you have any errors. And I think Terry posted a really good question in here. Students who prefer to use block to create tasks in APCSP. Interesting that they used to use block in APCSP.
Yeah, because with APCSP, you have the option of using blocks, Java, Python, JavaScript. But a lot of students I've noticed still lean toward blocks. And I haven't been able to figure out why from a research standpoint. I think it's because of the debugging and syntax errors or lack thereof.
Yeah, that would be my guess, is it's the syntax that's going to throw them completely there.
Right. And so what made me think about that is you mentioned in middle school, you guys are transitioning from blocks to text.
Yeah.
But I still noticed that some still like blocks because of, I'm guessing, because of the syntax.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really, and see, the AP stuff I haven't dived super deep into. We have 3 AP courses that are like in final stages of coming out in the fall. And so I may be calling on you guys to help me write PD for those.
Yeah, I was just curious if anyone else in the room had any input on that. I wasn't sure if the whole room was middle school students or not, or middle school teachers, I'm sorry, or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great, interesting question for sure. So let's give you about 2 or 3 minutes to go and kind of poke around with the transition. Definitely, if you have any ideas on that, I'd love to hear those as well. And really, as we talk, if there's other ideas you have about like how do we transition kids here, definitely share those with us. We would love to hear those kind of also as we go. So I'll give you a couple minutes here, and then we'll go from there. So a great question here from, and I know we've met in the past. So as far as switching to Python or Java in the Parrot drones, so we do have that partnership with Parrot drones, and I can flip back over just to make sure that I answer this question. And the answer to that is yes. You can switch to anything in Tynker. You can switch to the Python and JavaScript. So like if I come down here to the drone course, where is it? Right here. And I look at those drones, and you could do it with microbit as well. And I look at like flight training. So if you look at kind of that puzzle environment, so like this long flight, you can actually switch these. And I've done that. And so one of the kind of things that I've done with kids is in Cobb County 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, they asked me to come out and be part of their drone event and basically teach kids how to code drones. And so one of the things I told the kids that I found super interesting is I basically just showed them the Python and JavaScript, and they were older elementary, middle school kids, and said, you know what, if you want to do it, it's an option. The amount of kids that transitioned to it was really interesting. But if you look at like Takeoff, I can still have those blocks where I can transition those to Python, to Swift, to JavaScript as well. And then the other part of that is when you look at it from a workshop standpoint. So again, workshop's a little bit different. So I think Aerobotics has a workshop. If I come over to the workshop project, again, it's the same. It's all built on the same kind of format. And so if I come over here and I start doing code in the drone, I start pulling in code, you still can transition that to JavaScript as well. So yep, it works on anything you can find in Tynker. You can use that transition. So again, it's that, can you actually go and use some of these things in a way that's not the kind of normal way of using, I guess not the normal way of using them, but use them as a way to transition those kids. Because I think that's something that as we look at coding, we don't talk about enough, is like, how do we transition to kids? So that's actually a really good question. Start with JavaScript and transform it into blocks. The answer is unfortunately no. It's a really good question, but you do have options where you can just code straight in JavaScript as well. So in that Programming 300 class course, there are let me go down here to courses. There is a JavaScript lesson as well. And that base JavaScript lesson is really similar to the Python one. You start kind of doing puzzles and then you can kind of transition from there. And then the other part is that with the kind of, and I like to stay in these kind of things in the free curriculum, but when you look at it from a standpoint of kind of the paid curriculum, there's a full JavaScript course that you can transition them into building things like Snake and Tetris and all that kind of stuff. There's a full Python 1 course. There's also a Python 2 course that'll actually teach kids, kind of give them coding problems to teach kids Python. And I'm still learning Python myself. It's actually one of my favorite courses we have because it does a really good job teaching kids data sets in it. And then there's also a web development course as well. So that's kind of, there's lots and lots of content there. You'll never run out of content here. But definitely kind of look at kind of that piece of like, can you start in that kind of free curriculum? The other part here is that if you look at create project up here, the kids have this, you have this. You can create projects both in that block coding format, but you can also create projects in Python, JavaScript, HTML, robotics. You can do all of that. I think probably if you want kind of the best one-to-one Python experience of kind of hardware, Microbit is a really good way to go because there's both a Microbit block course and a Python course. So the other thing that I want to point out and kind of the create project part. So Ryan, the create project part is free for the most part. Any of the blank projects are free. Some of the kind of base templates in there go with the premium accounts. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones do. The other thing that I think is a really good kind of starting place for you guys and to look at is going back to that Tynker Hour of Code page. And I'll give you some time to kind of poke around in here and play in here. Is when I go back to that Tynker Hour of Code page, this will actually give you a good amount, give you kind of a good kind of total view of what you can do to transition kids coding wise and really the kind of possibilities. And even if it's not with Tynker, the possibilities of where coding can go with your students. And so when you look at this page, and I'll give you some time to kind of poke around in here, you have K through 2 lessons. But remember those K through 2 lessons, you can actually transition those to Python and JavaScript. And so you could actually use them as middle school lessons. Obviously, you're probably not using Barbie at the middle school. I get it. But like Candy Quest is really simple to use as kind of that base middle school lesson. If you have kids, there's the 3rd and through 5th, but there's also grade 6 lessons. And so you look at it, there's things like Drag and Dash, and then there's JavaScript and Python lessons that are free. So do you have the option of back and forth between blocks and text coding on Tynker's app? It's just on the website. So it's just on, but it works on any web-based device. The reason being is that the text coding does not actually move over to, well, I take that back. Terry. So in the Tynker app, any of the puzzles convert to Swift. So they do convert to Swift. So any of the block coding puzzles you can see in Swift. I know that for sure. We kind of updated recently. I don't think you can do Python and JavaScript there. And the workshop, I don't believe connects. Yeah, so it's because of iOS and it's a partnership with Apple and all that kind of stuff. I think a place that's going to be a really good place to look at, one of my favorite places, and I'll give you some reasons to poke around with this. One of my favorite things that you could do to kind of do that transition is in the Hour of Code, we have lessons that are aligned with the UN. The UN has, and let's see if I can pull them up. the UN has these things called the Sustainable Development Goals. The idea behind these is that, let me see if I can go full screen here. The idea behind these is that there are these 17 goals the UN has laid out for the world by 2030. And so one of the ways that you could actually program kids to transition is we actually have lessons in here that are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but there's a lesson both in block and in a text language. So if you wanted to teach kids Python, you could start with them doing life on land in block. Then they can actually do life on land in Python. And these are part of the Hour of Code lessons. Same with affordable clean energy. They just transition to a different language. It's HTML, or responsible consumption and production, which transitions into JavaScript. So great way to do that. There's also NASA lessons here. And I think those are great kind of lessons that you can use. And some of these are text languages. So again, one of the ways you can transition is to say, okay, let's have kids tell their lunar gateway story in block, which is right here. And then they can transition and do it in JavaScript. And then the last, you have a text coding tab, Encounter Hack and Toxic Jungle, JavaScript, Python. But again, you also have those STEM lessons. So if you wanted to go in and try out what it looks like in that kind of creative sense of letting kids go and do that lesson in a core class, those are here for free that you can try as well. So let's give it a few minutes here. Let's give it about 3 or 4 minutes where you can go in and just try a lesson in the Hour of Code. Try some of these lessons here. There's definitely lots of content here for you that you can use. So I would definitely take a look at them real quick. So I'm going to give it about 3 or 4 minutes there. Then if you have more questions or you want to see something else in Tynker, I'm happy to show you. But then we can do a little bit of wrap up as well. And I can talk about kind of how you get more support, training, all that kind of stuff. So let's give it about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I will kind of move to that. If you have questions, we're definitely answering them as we go. So definitely pop those in the box. This is a plug too for middle school. If you want to actually do the Python Life on Land project with us, we are high school session on Wednesday. It's like one of the last sessions on Wednesday. We're actually going to, our head of content development is actually going to walk folks through the Python Life on Land project. So definitely that's, if you really want to kind of dive into that from a Python perspective, that's definitely a really great kind of resource and tool that will kind of come out there. So I'll give it about another minute and then we'll talk. If you have questions, throw those in the box and then we can go from there. So let's kind of, and if you have questions, again, if you want to see something else, definitely there'll be a little bit of time at the end. Let me share the right screen again. Let me share the right screen. One of the things I kind of want to leave on, just so you guys have some extra help, is kind of some stuff about like, how do you stay kind of seeing what we're doing, seeing the connection. Keynote's being a little crazy. Terry, just checking you can see the slide deck. All right, cool. So just to kind of some things to stay connected is, number one is there's lots of communities with Tynker. We use every student can code and every teacher can code because, again, that's what we really believe here, is that we don't want coding and computer science to be more than just like a couple of kids. We think that, and one of the people that I've heard say it really well is I saw Jamie Cassup, who's like the education evangelist at Google. I saw him speak at a conference once, and he really said it well. He said, not everybody needs to be a computer programmer. But when you look especially at some place, look at Google as an example. There are people who are in ad sales. There are people who do all kinds of other things at Google. But what drives the ship? It's programmers and the code behind it. So those folks need to have some understanding of it. And then again, I think you guys have probably seen this 100 different ways today, and you'll see this 100 different ways in the next 2 days, is that there's so much skill that comes out of it, that comes out of coding. It's that creation. Can we let kids create in a class? Can we go and can we learn problem solving? Can we do that? That really we need that opportunity for every student to code. And I think what we're trying to do here is give that opportunity for every teacher to be able to teach it. And especially from a standpoint of having lesson plans and setting classes up like an LMS system, that's kind of the key. And then there's also a Facebook community. What's been really cool about, not what's been cool about COVID, but what's been interesting about COVID is that Facebook community has really grown during this time. So definitely take a look at that. And again, you guys are going to get the slide deck here, but definitely I'll leave that up for a second. And then we'll talk about kind of the support side of it. And I think what's really key for you guys, if you really want to like drive down to like, this is what I want to do with my students. I live in Northeast Cobb County. When we can actually come back to schools and we can actually, and outsiders can actually visit. I would love to visit you in Atlanta. You'll see on Wednesday, we're doing a K-2 session, and the teacher who's doing it with me is actually at Soap Creek Elementary, which is like 10 minutes from my house in Cobb County. And I go to her school all the time because I love that kind of teacher feel. So if you need extra stuff, there's an education support email, there's a technical support email. And then I think the key too is just getting more training, like getting a lot of training, and training that's not just about Tynker, but it's about like CS pedagogy and about like how do you actually use block coding and how do you actually use that, because those are skills that will carry over to other platforms like even Scratch. Those are skills that will carry over to there. So definitely I'll leave that up for a second. Then I'll pull this down. We can answer any questions and call it a session.
If you would like to ask a question and want to turn on your cam, just let me know, or just send in a request, I should say. I see one from Ryan.
Maybe. All right, hold on. I have to turn off my video because I'm not using my webcam. Hey, David, really great session. So one thing I wanted to ask is that I think today we saw a little bit about how to begin the transition with Tynker from blocks to text, but not if like basically what the support is for Tynker on the next step. Because, it's something that I've seen with a lot of tools where, they do their sort of like, hey, like start with the blocks and then this is what the code looks like. But then the code is mostly just a bunch of, a series of function calls. And, the functionality of those function calls, it's basically an abstraction for hiding what's really going on behind the scenes. And the kids never really get to the point where they're sort of defining their own functionalities. So can you talk to me about what Tynker does to support that next step where they are actually doing that sort of level of programming?
Yeah, so when you look at the kind of next step, so the next step in kind of, so I think it's kind of, you see that block, you see kind of what it looks like. the next step is to actually start writing some of that code in my mind.
Yes.
And so when you look at kind of that code from that perspective, is really these two courses right here, this Python course and JavaScript course, they start really, really simply. And so it's not a hard transition there where you start with really basics. So like Jungle Run is you're just going and you're actually writing that command there, but it's going to transition to where you're going to loops and you start working in conditionals and you start kind of picking up the pieces with this kind of puzzle environment. And then I think the key is kind of transitioning them to where they can actually like answer a coding problem. And that's why when you look at like Python 201 is here. Because the idea is that it's actually going to start transitioning from that kind of simple, like, here's how to walk this character through Python to actually writing like data sets in Python. And so the content there is based on like, and this is content that I'll admit that, so you start getting into data types and Boolean logic, and it's still stuff that I'm learning as well. But you kind of move into there where the kids are actually writing like real coding problems. And I can click on this and show you what this kind of looks like. And then kind of the transition from that is we actually have three courses in the works where there's like a kind of like a next level course. I think it's going to be something of CS and art where they're actually doing art with real text code. I haven't seen the course, so I can't say much about it. And then transitioning into AP. But the idea here is that they have these coding problems to really go and transition into like, how do I use Boolean logic in Python?
Okay. Can you talk briefly about the differences between the free and paid, what the limitations are, and what you get when you pay?
So really the limitations as far as the free and paid, you can create as many classes in Tynker as you want with as many students as you want for free. When you look at it from a paid perspective, really where it becomes transitioned to the paid, and it really, I think it's got a lot of value, especially if you're teaching a lot of text languages, is the courses transition into that kind of paid tier, because this entire course page right here, the ones that are free are Programming 100, Programming 300, and the Barbie course. And then when you look at kind of the Create Project tab, you have lots of options for free to create projects, but there are some in there that are on the paid tier. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones they are. I'd actually have to transition to a free account to show you. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fine.
But that you can still, so what I see a lot of folks do too, is even if you had stuff for just a short amount of time, you can always, or if you create your own projects, you can always save your own projects under My Projects and assign those as well. And you will never lose any of these projects that are here. So there's lots of options in there for free, but it's that course content that actually takes it up to the premium tier.
Okay, cool. Thanks for answering my questions.
Other questions? Is there anyone else want to get on and ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys, for joining in with us.
And so, as I mentioned earlier in the chat, we'll have a link to David's presentation on our Constellations site once we get that up, or once we turn that feature on later this week.
Terry, do I just, before I lose you, do I just email that to like you and Lean and that kind of?
Yes, if you could email, correct. If you can email us the link and we'll put it on our site.
Cool. Yep, I can do that.
Today.
I can do that, no problem.
Yeah, so if folks check after Wednesday, you should see all that stuff up there.
Yeah, and we're doing, if you teach other levels of kids, we're doing lots of sessions. We're doing K through 2, 3 through 5, and high school on Wednesday.
Excellent. Well,
cool.
If there's no questions, we'll close out the session. Thank y'all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, absolutely.